The desert holds its secrets beneath an indifferent sun, buried under layers of dust and disappointment. From a rocky outcrop, I watch the sunrise paint the mountains in shades of amber and blood, my boots planted firmly on land my family called worthless, land they begged me to abandon. They think I've lost my mind. Their whispers follow me like shadows, concern disguised as love, judgment masked as protection. Cut your losses, they say. Come back to reality. What they don't understand is that reality isn't always visible on the surface. Some treasures remain hidden until you're brave enough to dig deeper, to stand alone against the doubters, to trust what you know when everyone tells you you're wrong. In 3 days, everything will change. The same people who staged interventions to save me from myself will discover what I've known all along, that sometimes the person everyone thinks is crazy is the only one who's right. And by then, it might be too late for them to claim a piece of what's coming. The desert wind carried particles of sand that stung Eleanor Mitchell's face as she stood on the rocky outcrop, surveying the 200 acres of Nevada desert that had cost her every penny of her savings. The early morning sun cast long shadows across the seemingly worthless landscape: sagebrush, rock formations, an endless emptiness stretching toward distant mountains. To most eyes, it was nothing. To Eleanor's trained geological gaze, it was everything. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Thomas again. Third call this morning. Eleanor sighed and finally answered. Before you start lecturing me, I'm fine, she said, squinting against the morning glare. Dad's worried sick, her brother replied, his lawyer's voice carrying that familiar tone of reasoned concern that made her want to throw the phone into the nearest ravine. We all are. You missed Sunday dinner again to be out there in the middle of nowhere. Eleanor adjusted her worn field hat, a remnant from her days as a respected geologist at Apex Energy. I'm working, Thomas. Some of us do that on weekends. Staring at empty desert isn't work. Ellie? His voice softened. Look, I know the past few years have been rough, the divorce, what happened at Apex, but this isn't the way to rebuild. The mention of Apex sent a familiar chill down her spine. 3 years ago, she'd been their rising star, until she submitted reports warning about geological instabilities at their Wyoming drilling site. When management ignored her, she'd pushed harder. 2 months later, she was unemployed, her reputation in tatters. 6 months after that, the site collapsed, injuring 3 workers exactly as she had predicted. I appreciate the concern, she said, keeping her voice steady, but I know what I'm doing. Dad says you spent your entire inheritance from Grandma, $50,000. Ellie, for desert scrubland. She closed her eyes briefly. Plus 5,000 for the mineral rights. The silence that followed was weighted with judgment. Jesus, Ellie, you spent $55,000 on what exactly? What could possibly be out there? Eleanor watched an eagle circle overhead, riding thermals with effortless grace. Potential, Thomas. Sometimes the most valuable things aren't visible on the surface. Her brother's exasperated sigh was familiar. Mom wants you at dinner this Sunday. Non-negotiable. The whole family will be there. Eleanor knew what that meant. Another Mitchell family intervention. She'd been the subject of 3 already since her divorce from Mark 2 years ago. This would be the first focused on her desert obsession, as Diane had taken to calling it. Fine, she said finally. Tell Mom I'll bring dessert. After ending the call, Eleanor carefully made her way down from the rocks, pulling her tablet from her backpack. She opened a specialized geological mapping application and continued the systematic survey she'd been conducting for months. Dr. Benjamin Clark, her former professor and the only professional who still believed in her, had helped her customize the software to track specific mineral compositions and formations. 2 years of research had led her to this remote parcel. 2 years of late nights poring over geological surveys, satellite imagery, and government land reports while working as a freelance consultant to make ends meet. The irony wasn't lost on her. The same expertise that had cost her career at Apex now sustained her through small consulting jobs, mostly for environmental groups who didn't know or care about her blacklisting in the industry. Her phone buzzed again with a text from her younger brother, Peter. Fair warning, Diane's bringing charts to Sunday dinner to show you rational investments. Deep breaths. Sis. Eleanor smiled despite herself. At 32, Peter was the baby of the family and worked in finance. But unlike Thomas and Diane, he occasionally showed glimmers of understanding about her choices. He still thought she was making a mistake with the desert property, but at least he respected her enough not to constantly try to fix her. As she cataloged soil samples and took photographs of specific rock formations, Eleanor's mind drifted to the family dinner awaiting her. Her father, Richard, retired Army colonel, would sit at the head of the table. his weathered face a map of concern and confusion about his middle child's choices. Her mother, Margaret, a former high school English teacher, would fill every silence with nervous chatter. Thomas would dispense legal advice she hadn't asked for, while Diane, her older sister, would inevitably find ways to reference her successful real estate investments and picture-perfect family. The thought made Eleanor's stomach tighten. She had once been the Mitchell family success story, brilliant geologist, promising career, marriage to a successful architect. Now, at 35, she was divorced, professionally ostracized, and had sunk her grandmother's inheritance into 200 acres of land that her family believed worthless. What they didn't know, what nobody knew except Dr. Clark, was that Eleanor's investment was based on more than blind hope. It was founded on science, on patterns of geological formations that suggested this seemingly barren landscape held secrets beneath its surface, secrets that could vindicate her and transform her future, if only her research proved correct. Sunday arrived with the inevitability of a slowly advancing storm front. Eleanor parked her dusty Jeep in front of her parents' well-maintained colonial in the Reno suburbs, the vehicle looking decidedly out of place among the shiny sedans and SUVs belonging to her siblings. The apple pie she'd baked that morning, one of the few domestic skills she'd mastered, sat on the passenger seat, still warm. Taking a deep breath, she gathered the pie and her courage and headed for the front door. "She's here," her mother called out as Eleanor entered. Margaret Mitchell rushed forward, enveloping her in a hug that smelled of familiar perfume and anxiety. "Honey, you look thin. Are you eating properly out there in the desert?" Before Eleanor could answer, her father appeared in the hallway. Richard Mitchell's military bearing remained intact a decade into retirement, his posture straight and his gray hair precisely cut. But his eyes, those were different. The confident gaze that had guided Eleanor through childhood now held shadows of worry. "Eleanor," he said simply, pulling her into a brief but firm embrace. "Hi, Dad," she replied, breathing in the scent of his aftershave, the same brand he'd used for as long as she could remember. The living room revealed the rest of the Mitchell clan already assembled. Thomas sat in an armchair, his wife Jessica beside him on the arm, both in casual but expensive-looking clothes. Diane and her husband Greg occupied the love seat, while Peter lounged on the couch, tapping on his phone. 3 children, Diane's 9-year-old twins and Thomas's 5-year-old daughter, played in the adjacent den. "The desert wanderer returns to civilization," Diane said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. At 38, she was 3 years Eleanor's senior and never let her forget it. "We were just discussing the housing market. My latest property is already up 12% in value." "Congratulations," Eleanor said, placing her pie on the coffee table. "That's impressive." "Consistent returns are impressive," Diane corrected, with the air of someone delivering a lesson. "Reliable growth based on sound market analysis is impressive. That's how wealth is built, not by gambling on hunches." Thomas cleared his throat. "Let's wait until after dinner for this discussion. Shall we?" Eleanor shot him a grateful look, though she knew the reprieve was temporary. Dinner was Margaret's pot roast, a family tradition that usually brought comfort. Tonight, the familiar food sat heavily in Eleanor's stomach as conversation flowed around her Thomas's latest case, Diane's children's achievements, Peter's promotion at the investment firm, normal family topics that somehow highlighted the unusual path Eleanor's life had taken. "So, Eleanor," Greg finally asked during a lull, "Thomas mentioned you bought some land out in the desert, thinking of building a vacation home or something." A loaded silence fell over the table. Eleanor placed her fork down carefully. "It's an investment property," she said. 200 acres about 90 minutes from here." "Investment?" Greg's eyebrows rose. "What kind of return are you expecting from desert land?" Before Eleanor could answer, Diane interjected. "That's actually something we wanted to discuss tonight." She glanced at their parents. "All of us are concerned about Eleanor's situation." And there it was. The intervention had officially begun. "Honey," Margaret said, reaching for Eleanor's hand across the table, "we're worried about you. First, the divorce, then losing your position at Apex, and now this desert purchase. It feels like you're making decisions from a place of emotional distress rather than rational thinking." Eleanor pulled her hand away. "My decisions are based on research and professional assessment. Mom, I spent 2 years studying geological surveys before buying that land." 2 years of research to buy dirt and sagebrush," Diane said, shaking her head. "Ellie, do you know what kind of returns you could have gotten if you'd invested that money in rental properties or even a basic index fund?" Richard cleared his throat. "Eleanor, your grandmother left you that money hoping it would provide security. I'm concerned that you've placed all of it into a speculative venture without diversification." "It's not speculative," Eleanor insisted, feeling her face flush. There's significant potential for renewable energy development in that region. The elevation, sun exposure, and proximity to existing power infrastructure make it ideal for solar installation. Thomas leaned forward. If that's true, why hasn't any energy company already developed the area? Because they don't have the specific geological data I have, she replied, careful not to reveal too much. And where exactly did this specific geological data come from? Diane asked, making air quotes. The same intuition that got you fired from Apex. The table fell silent. Even Diane seemed to realize she'd crossed a line. Eleanor's hands trembled slightly as she placed her napkin beside her plate. I wasn't fired for bad intuition. I was fired for being right when my superiors wanted me to be wrong. 3 people were injured because Apex ignored my reports. Ellie, Thomas said softly, we know you believe that, but it's not about belief. Eleanor cut in. It's documented fact. The Wyoming site collapsed exactly where and how I predicted. The lawsuit was settled out of court precisely because my reports proved they were negligent. Peter, who had been quiet until now, finally spoke. She's right about that part. I have a friend at Mendel Insurance who handled Apex's policy. They paid out because Eleanor's reports were solid science. Eleanor shot her younger brother a grateful look. Richard studied his middle child with narrowed eyes. If your assessment was correct about Wyoming, why did your professional reputation suffer? Shouldn't being proven right have vindicated you? A bitter smile crossed Eleanor's face. That's not how the industry works. Dad, Apex has too much influence. They made sure everyone heard I was difficult, emotional, uncooperative, not that I was correct. Which brings us back to the current situation, Margaret interjected gently. Honey, we're concerned that this desert purchase might be a reaction to what happened at Apex. Maybe a need to prove yourself right about something else. Eleanor looked around the table, at the faces of her family concerned, skeptical, pitying. Only Peter showed a glimmer of something else. Understanding, perhaps, or at least the willingness to consider that she might know what she was doing. I understand your concerns, she said carefully, but this isn't an emotional decision. I've spent 2 years analyzing data, consulting with experts, and developing a comprehensive understanding of that property's potential. The current market valuation doesn't reflect its true worth. Diane sighed dramatically. And I suppose you know something that all the professional developers and energy companies have somehow missed. Actually, yes, Eleanor replied, meeting her sister's gaze steadily. Sometimes specialized knowledge reveals opportunities that others overlook. Thomas exchanged glances with their father. Eleanor, there's something else we need to discuss. Your recent behavior has us worried about your emotional well-being. My emotional well-being? Eleanor repeated, a knot forming in her stomach. The isolation, the obsession with this property, the way you've withdrawn from friends and normal activities, her brother continued. Mom and Dad told me you've been camping out there alone for days at a time. I'm conducting field research, Eleanor explained, frustration creeping into her voice. That requires being on site. Margaret reached across the table again. Dr. Winters, you remember Sarah Winters from my book club. She's a therapist, and she says your behavior shows signs of what might be a trauma response to the professional setbacks and your divorce. You've been discussing me with your book club friend, Eleanor asked incredulously. A professional assessment, Richard clarified. We're concerned about depression, possibly some form of post-traumatic stress from what happened at Apex. Eleanor pushed her chair back from the table. So, because I made an investment you don't understand, you think I need psychiatric help? It's not just the investment, honey, Margaret said. It's the isolation, the fixation, spending all your time in the desert taking soil samples and staring at rocks. Dr. Winters thinks. I don't care what Dr. Winters thinks. Eleanor interrupted, standing up. She's never met me, never examined me, and has no business making assessments based on secondhand information from a book club. Peter stood as well. She's right, Mom. That's completely unprofessional of Dr. Winters. Stay out of this, Peter, Thomas warned. No, I won't, Peter replied firmly. You're all acting like Eleanor has lost her mind because she made an investment none of you understand. Has anyone here actually asked her to explain the geological research she mentioned? Has anyone bothered to look at her data before deciding she needs therapy? Silence fell over the table. Eleanor looked at her younger brother with surprise and gratitude. Peter has a point, Richard finally said, his military training perhaps making him more receptive to reconsidering tactical approaches. Eleanor, would you be willing to show us your research, help us understand what you see in this property? Eleanor hesitated. Most of her data was highly technical, and some of it, particularly her collaboration with Dr. Clark, was protected by non disclosure agreements, but perhaps sharing the basic geological surveys would help. I can show you some of the preliminary surveys, she offered. Not everything, but enough to demonstrate this isn't a random choice. That would be helpful. Her father nodded. But first, Diane interjected, there's something else you should know. She glanced at Thomas, who nodded slightly. Dad's friend Frank Bailey knows someone who's interested in off-grid properties. He's willing to offer you $60,000 for the land. That would give you a small profit and let you reinvest in something more conventional. Eleanor felt her throat tighten. The property isn't for sale. Ellie, be reasonable, Thomas urged. That's a 10% return in less than a year. You can walk away with a profit and put this behind you. I said it's not for sale, Eleanor repeated firmly. And I'd like to know why Frank Bailey's friend is so interested in worthless desert land. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. I think we should see Eleanor's research before pushing the sale option, Richard said finally, surprising everyone. If she's put 2 years into studying this land, we owe her the courtesy of understanding her reasoning. Diane looked like she wanted to argue, but subsided at a look from their father. Thank you, Dad, Eleanor said quietly. As the family moved to the living room for coffee and Eleanor's apple pie, Peter fell into step beside her. You okay? He asked quietly. Not really, she admitted. But thanks for standing up for me. They mean well, Peter said, glancing at their assembled family. They're just worried because your path doesn't look like what they expected. Doesn't mean you're wrong. Eleanor smiled wryly. When did my little brother get so wise? Around the same time my big sister started taking on the whole world alone, he replied. Whatever you found out there in the desert, Ellie, just remember you don't have to face it by yourself. The following Wednesday, Eleanor's phone rang as she was collecting soil samples near the eastern boundary of her property. Dr. Benjamin Clark's name flashed on the screen. Tell me you have good news, she answered, wiping sweat from her brow. The Nevada sun was merciless, even in early spring. Better than good, the older man replied, his voice carrying the excitement that had made him a favorite professor during Eleanor's university days. The spectroscopic analysis confirmed our preliminary findings. The soil composition shows all the markers we were looking for. Eleanor's heart raced. You're certain? Absolutely. The samples from the eastern quadrant show the highest concentration, exactly where your initial survey suggested they would be. Eleanor, this is remarkable work. She sat down on a nearby rock, suddenly needing the support. After 2 years of research, months of sampling and testing, and the constant weight of her family's doubt, here finally was confirmation. Have you shared this with anyone else? She asked. Of course not, Dr. Clark replied. Our non-disclosure agreement is ironclad. This stays between us until you decide otherwise. Thank you, Ben. She took a deep breath. What about the secondary markers? Any confirmation there? That's actually why I called. The lithium concentration is significantly higher than our initial estimates, not just viable for extraction, but potentially one of the richest deposits in North America. Combined with the property's suitability for solar development, you're sitting on what could become the most valuable energy parcel in Nevada. Eleanor closed her eyes, letting the magnitude of this discovery wash over her. The land her family had mocked as a wasteland potentially contained lithium deposits worth hundreds of millions of dollars, the essential mineral for electric vehicle batteries and renewable energy storage systems. Combined with the site's ideal characteristics for solar energy development, its value was nearly incalculable. We need to be careful about next steps, she said finally. If word gets out before I've secured the proper protections, there are companies that would do anything to gain control of this site. Companies like Apex? Dr. Clark stated rather than asked. Exactly. Eleanor's mind raced through contingencies. The government land auction for the adjacent parcel is scheduled for next month. That will be our first indication of whether other entities have similar data. What about your family? Are you going to tell them? Eleanor thought about Sunday's dinner, about the mixture of concern and condescension in her siblings' eyes, about her parents' worry that she was suffering from some kind of breakdown. Not yet, she decided. They'd either think I'm delusional or immediately push me to sell to the highest bidder. I need to maintain control until I've developed a comprehensive strategy. Fair enough, Dr. Clark agreed. But Eleanor, be careful. If our analysis is correct, and I believe it is, there are powerful interests that would go to extraordinary lengths to control these resources. Your safety should be your priority. After ending the call, Eleanor sat motionless on the sun-warmed rock, her mind processing implications and possibilities. The land beneath her feet could potentially transform not just her life, but the future of American energy production. The lithium essential for battery storage and the ideal conditions for solar generation created a perfect storm of opportunity. A dust cloud in the distance caught her attention. A vehicle was approaching along the rough dirt track that served as the only access to her property. As it drew closer, Eleanor recognized her father's pickup truck. Richard Mitchell had been making these unannounced visits periodically since she purchased the property, ostensibly to check on her welfare, but clearly also to monitor what he considered her concerning behavior. Today, however, the timing was particularly inconvenient given the news she'd just received. Eleanor quickly tucked her tablet into her backpack, making sure the soil samples were securely stored. By the time her father's truck pulled up beside her Jeep, she had composed her features into a neutral expression. Richard stepped out, his eyes scanning the barren landscape before settling on his daughter. "Thought I might find you out here. Your mother's been trying to reach you all morning." "My phone doesn't get great reception in some areas," Eleanor explained, which was partially true. "Is everything okay?" Richard gestured toward a flat rock nearby. "Mind if we talk a bit?" They sat side by side, father and daughter, looking out over the expanse of desert stretching toward distant mountains. For a moment, it reminded Eleanor of their camping trips, when she was young Richard teaching her to read topographical maps and identify constellations, nurturing the scientific curiosity that would eventually lead to her career in geology. "I looked at those surveys you showed us Sunday night," he said finally. "Can't say I understood all the technical aspects, but it's clear you put serious work into studying this land." Eleanor nodded, surprised by this acknowledgement. "2 years of research before I made the purchase. That's what's been bothering me," Richard continued, squinting against the sun. "You've always been methodical, even as a child. You didn't make moves without calculating all possible outcomes. It didn't track that you'd suddenly make an impulsive purchase." A small smile tugged at Eleanor's lips. "Thanks for remembering that about me. I'm your father, Eleanor. I know who you are, even when your choices confuse me." He turned to look directly at her. "Which is why I need to ask you something, and I need an honest answer." Eleanor tensed slightly. "Okay. Is there something about this land that you're not telling us? Something beyond the solar potential you mentioned?" The question hung in the air between them. Eleanor's mind raced. How much could she safely reveal? How much should she keep protected? "Dad, there are aspects of my research that are covered by confidentiality agreements," she said carefully. "Professional consultations that I can't discuss freely." Richard's eyes narrowed slightly. "Professional consultations about this specific property." Eleanor nodded. "Before or after you purchased it?" "Both," she admitted. "Initial research before, ongoing analysis after?" Her father absorbed this information, his weathered face thoughtful. "Does this have anything to do with what happened at Apex?" The question caught her off guard. "Why would you think that?" "Because you've been different since that Wyoming site collapsed. More guarded, more determined to prove something." He sighed. "Eleanor, if this land purchase is about vindicating yourself after Apex—" "It's not," she interrupted, then reconsidered. "Or at least, not entirely. What happened at Apex showed me how major energy companies can ignore crucial scientific data when it conflicts with their financial interests. I'm trying to build something different." Richard studied her face, seeming to weigh her words. "Frank Bailey has been asking a lot of questions about your property." Eleanor stiffened. "Frank Bailey, Dad's friend who supposedly knows someone interested in buying my land." "The same," Richard nodded. "Thing is, Frank doesn't know anyone looking for off-grid property. That was Diane's invention. But he has been asking when you bought it, whether you secured mineral rights, who helped with the purchase." "Why would he be asking those questions?" Eleanor asked, though she already suspected the answer. "Frank consults for several energy companies," Richard said meaningfully, "including Apex." A chill ran through Eleanor despite the desert heat. If Apex was showing interest in her property, it meant they might have their own data suggesting its value. The timing of their interest, so close to Dr. Clark's confirmation of the lithium deposits, couldn't be coincidental. "Dad, I need you to promise me something," she said, her voice low and urgent. "Don't share any information about my property with Frank or anyone else. Not the location, not the purchase details, nothing." Richard's expression grew concerned. "Eleanor, what exactly have you gotten yourself into?" "Something important," she replied. "Something that could make a real difference. But I need time to secure the proper protections before word gets out." Her father studied her face for a long moment. Does this have anything to do with mineral rights? Because Diane mentioned you paid extra for those, and that struck me as odd for desert property supposedly valuable only for solar potential. Eleanor hesitated, then decided to trust him with a partial truth. Yes, the mineral composition of this region is significant. Richard nodded slowly. I won't ask for details you can't share. But, Eleanor, if there are powerful interests involved, you need to be careful, and you need allies. I am being careful, she assured him. And I have one ally already my former professor is consulting on the analysis. You need more than one, Richard insisted. Whatever you've discovered out here, don't face it alone. As her father drove away, Eleanor felt the weight of her knowledge pressing down on her. The lithium deposits beneath her feet represented not just personal vindication and financial opportunity, but potential danger as well. If Apex was already making inquiries, others might not be far behind. She pulled out her phone and dialed Peter's number. Hey, Desert Queen, he answered cheerfully. Please tell me you're calling because you've decided to sell that wasteland and invest in my hedge fund instead. Not exactly, Eleanor replied. But I do need financial advice. How familiar are you with mineral rights valuations and strategic partnership structures? Oddly specific question, Peter remarked, his tone shifting from teasing to professional interest. Why do you ask? I can't give details over the phone, Eleanor said, but I need someone I can trust to help me navigate some potentially complex negotiations in the near future. Someone who understands both finance and family dynamics. A brief silence followed. This sounds serious. Ellie. It is, she confirmed, more serious than anyone realizes. All right, Peter said, his voice carrying new resolve. I'm in, whatever you need, but you'll have to fill me in properly. I will, Eleanor promised. Soon. For now, just keep this conversation between us, especially from Diane and Thomas. That bad, huh? Peter asked lightly, though she could hear the concern underlying his tone. That complicated, Eleanor corrected, and potentially that valuable. After ending the call, Eleanor turned to survey her property once more. The seemingly barren landscape stretched out before her, its secrets hidden beneath layers of dust and rock. To uninformed eyes, it was nothing but worthless desert. To Eleanor's trained geological perspective, informed by years of research and now confirmed by scientific analysis, it was a treasure of almost incalculable value. And if her suspicions about Apex's interest were correct, it was also about to become the focus of a battle she'd need all her expertise and her family's support to win. 3 weeks later, Eleanor sat in the small conference room of Dr. Clark's university office, surrounded by maps, soil analysis reports, and satellite imagery. Peter sat beside her, his expression a mixture of shock and growing excitement as he processed what she and Dr. Clark had just explained. Let me get this straight, he said, tapping the geological survey spread across the table. Based on these samples, you believe there's a lithium deposit under your property that could be worth. Conservative estimates suggest between $200 and $300 million in extraction value, Dr. Clark confirmed, his academic demeanor lending gravity to the astronomical figures. Combined with the site's exceptional solar potential, we're looking at one of the most valuable energy parcels in the American Southwest. Peter let out a low whistle. And you've known this was possible for how long? I had strong indications from government geological surveys 2 years ago, Eleanor explained. That's why I spent so much time researching before purchasing, but we only confirmed the lithium concentrations 3 weeks ago, which explains why you suddenly wanted my financial expertise. Peter nodded, pieces falling into place. Ellie, this is beyond anything I imagined. No wonder you've been so secretive. Eleanor leaned forward. And it has to stay that way, at least until after the government land auction next week. If word gets out prematurely, it could compromise my position significantly. Peter ran a hand through his hair, his financial training clearly processing implications. The adjacent government land, if it's part of the same geological formation? It almost certainly is, Dr. Clark confirmed. Though our analysis suggests the highest concentration of lithium is centered on Eleanor's property, particularly the eastern section, which means whoever wins the government auction will need access to Eleanor's land to maximize extraction potential, Peter concluded. That creates massive leverage. Eleanor nodded. Exactly. But it also creates risk. If a company like Apex secures the government parcel, they might use aggressive tactics to force my cooperation. Like what? Peter asked, frowning. Like environmental challenges that tie up the property in litigation, Dr. Clark suggested. or manipulating access rights to the only road leading to the site. Or worse, Eleanor added quietly. Apex has significant political influence and financial resources. They've already been asking questions about my purchase through Dad's friend Frank. Peter's expression grew serious. You need protection legal, financial, and maybe physical security. That's why I'm trusting you with this now, Eleanor said. I need your help developing a strategy that maximizes value while minimizing vulnerability. You should tell Dad, Peter said after a moment. He has military contacts, security expertise, and after what you told me about his visit to the property, I think he suspects something already. Eleanor hesitated. I'm worried about too many people knowing before I've secured proper protections. Dad isn't too many people, Peter insisted. He's a tactical thinker with decades of experience managing sensitive situations, and he loves you, Ellie. He'd do anything to protect you. Dr. Clark cleared his throat. If I may offer an outside perspective, having a former military officer aware of the situation might be prudent, especially given the potential security concerns. Eleanor considered this. Her father's military background had given him skills in risk assessment and strategic planning that could prove invaluable. And unlike Diane or Thomas, Richard Mitchell had shown a willingness to listen to her reasoning rather than dismiss it outright. All right, she agreed. I'll brief Dad, but not Mom or the others. Not yet. Agreed. Peter nodded. Mom would worry herself sick, and Diane would immediately push for a sale to eliminate risk. And Thomas, Dr. Clark asked. Eleanor and Peter exchanged looks. Thomas is complicated, Eleanor explained. He's protective, but also convinced he knows best, and his legal expertise is in corporate contracts, not mineral rights or energy development. Plus, he's close with Diane, Peter added. They've always formed a united front in family matters. Eleanor gathered some of the maps and reports. The government land auction is next Monday. Once that's complete, we'll have a better sense of who knows what about the region's potential. Then we can develop a more comprehensive strategy. As they prepared to leave, Dr. Clark pulled Eleanor aside. There's something else you should know, he said quietly. I received a job offer yesterday from Meridian Energy, senior research position, significant salary increase, immediate start date. Eleanor felt a knot form in her stomach. Meridian is one of Apex's subsidiaries. Indeed, Dr. Clark nodded gravely. The timing seems unlikely to be coincidental. They're trying to pull you away from me, Eleanor realized, either to gain your expertise or to leave me without scientific support. I declined, of course, he assured her. But it suggests they may be aware of more than we realized. Be careful, Eleanor. These are powerful entities with enormous resources. On the drive back to Reno, Peter was uncharacteristically quiet, staring out the window at the passing desert landscape with new appreciation. It doesn't look different, does it? Eleanor said, noticing his contemplation. Knowing what's beneath the surface doesn't change its appearance. But it changes everything else, Peter replied thoughtfully. Value, potential, risk, all transformed by invisible reality. He turned to look at her. It makes me wonder what else we miss by judging based on surface appearances. Eleanor smiled slightly. Now you sound like a geologist? I'm starting to understand why you became one, he admitted. There's something profound about looking beyond what's visible to what's possible. They drove in companionable silence for several miles before Peter spoke again. Ellie, what are you planning to do if this all works out? If the lithium deposits are as valuable as Dr. Clark suggests, and you secure favorable development terms? It was a question Eleanor had been asking herself ever since the confirmation of the deposits. Create something meaningful, she said finally. Not just financially, but something that balances economic development with environmental responsibility. Lithium is essential for the renewable energy transition, but extraction can be destructive if done carelessly. Peter studied his sister's profile. You're not just thinking about the money, are you? The money matters, Eleanor acknowledged, especially after years of financial struggle. But what matters more is doing this right, creating a model that other developments could follow. Vindication? Peter said softly. Not just personal, but professional, proving that scientific integrity and economic success can coexist. Eleanor nodded, surprised and touched by her brother's insight. Something like that? As they approached Reno, Peter's phone chimed with a text message. His expression darkened as he read it. What is it? Eleanor asked. Diane, he replied, showing her the screen. She's called an emergency family meeting tonight at Mom and Dad's. Says it's about Eleanor's situation, and that we all need to present a united front. Eleanor's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Did something trigger this? Not that I know of, Peter frowned, scrolling through the message chain. But Thomas replied that he has significant concerns to share. That doesn't sound good. A sense of foreboding settled over Eleanor. The timing, just days before the government land auction, seemed too coincidental. Change of plans, she decided, making a sudden turn. We're going to see Dad right now, before this family meeting. He needs to understand what's at stake before Diane and Thomas start their intervention. Agreed, Peter said grimly. And Ellie, whatever happens tonight, remember, you're not alone in this anymore. Richard Mitchell's face remained impassive as Eleanor and Peter spread the geological surveys and analysis reports across his home office desk. A lifetime of military discipline had given him exceptional control over his reactions, but the slight tightening around his eyes betrayed his surprise as Dr. Clark's findings were explained. Lithium? He said finally, the word hanging in the air like a revelation. That's what you couldn't tell me about at the property. Eleanor nodded. The deposits appear to be among the most substantial undiscovered reserves in North America. Combined with the site's solar potential, it creates a uniquely valuable energy development opportunity. Richard studied the extraction value projections Peter had prepared. These figures are significant, life-changing, Peter confirmed, potentially game-changing for the entire region's economy. Their father leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. This explains Frank Bailey's unusual interest. If Apex has similar data about the region's potential, they'd be highly motivated to acquire Eleanor's property. Exactly, Eleanor agreed. And it's not just Apex. The government land auction on Monday will likely attract multiple energy companies interested in the area. Which means Eleanor needs protection, Peter added. Legal, financial, and possibly physical security. Richard nodded slowly, his military mind clearly assessing threats and contingencies. The timing of Diane's emergency family meeting tonight seems suspicious. What exactly did Thomas say he wanted to discuss? Peter checked his phone again. Significant concerns about Eleanor's situation. Nothing more specific. Dad, Eleanor said carefully, has Thomas mentioned anything to you about my property recently? Or about Frank Bailey? A shadow crossed Richard's face. Frank invited Thomas to golf last weekend. Said he wanted legal advice about mineral rights on undeveloped land. I didn't think much of it at the time. But now it seems like more than coincidence, Peter finished grimly. You think Thomas might be working with Apex against Eleanor? Richard asked, his voice sharp with concern. Not deliberately, Eleanor clarified. Thomas would never knowingly harm me, but if Frank presented it as helping me protecting me from myself by facilitating a favorable sale, Thomas might see it as acting in my best interest. Richard's jaw tightened. That sounds like Frank. And like Thomas, unfortunately. The question is, Peter said, what do we do about tonight's meeting? Eleanor can't reveal the lithium deposits without risking premature exposure. But without that context, she'll appear irrational for refusing to consider selling. Their father stood and moved to the window, looking out at the carefully tended garden where Eleanor and her siblings had played as children. When he turned back, his expression was resolute. We need to control the narrative, he said, military strategy evident in his tone. Eleanor, you'll attend this meeting, but reveal only what's necessary to buy time until after Monday's auction. Peter and I will provide support. Once the auction results clarify which companies are aware of the region's potential, we can develop a more comprehensive family briefing. And if Thomas or Diane pushes for an immediate decision about selling, Eleanor asked. Richard's expression hardened. Then I'll make it clear that no Mitchell makes major financial decisions under pressure, and that, as a family, we support each other's autonomy even when we don't fully understand their choices. The doorbell rang, signaling the arrival of the first family members for the evening's meeting. Remember, Richard said quietly as they prepared to leave his office, reveal only what's necessary, maintain your composure, and know that you're not facing this alone. As they entered the living room, Eleanor saw her mother arranging coffee cups with nervous energy. Margaret Mitchell handled family tension by focusing on hospitality, a pattern established through decades of military relocations and managing a household during Richard's deployments. Eleanor, Peter, she greeted them, surprise evident in her voice. You're early. I thought you were coming separately. Change of plans, Mom, Peter explained smoothly. Eleanor and I had some business to discuss, so we drove together. Business? Margaret's eyebrows rose. What kind of business? Before either could answer. The front door opened as Thomas and Diane arrived simultaneously, their expressions serious. Behind them followed Jessica and Greg, indicating this was indeed considered a significant family event. Good, you're here, Diane said, spotting Eleanor. We need to talk. Let's at least have coffee first, Margaret suggested, gesturing toward the living room. No need to start immediately with difficult conversations. Actually, there is, Thomas countered, his lawyer's demeanor in full evidence. This is time sensitive, Mom. Eleanor exchanged glances with Peter and their father, the three of them now united in awareness of what might be unfolding. Once everyone was seated in the living room, coffee distributed but barely touched, Diane took charge as she often did in family gatherings. We've called this meeting because we're deeply concerned about Eleanor, she began, her voice carrying the practiced concern of someone who believed they were acting for another's good. Recent information has come to our attention that makes her desert property situation even more worrying than we initially thought. What kind of information? Richard asked, his tone neutral but watchful. Thomas cleared his throat. I've been conducting some legal research into the property Eleanor purchased. The previous owner sold it significantly below market value, which raised red flags about potential environmental liabilities or access disputes. Eleanor kept her expression neutral, though internally she was calculating rapidly. The previous owner had sold at a low price precisely because most buyers wouldn't recognize the land's potential value without specialized geological knowledge. Additionally, Diane continued, Frank Bailey informed us that Apex Energy has flagged that entire region as potentially problematic for development due to environmental concerns, unstable soil composition, possible contamination from historical mining operations. Now Eleanor understood their strategy. They were attempting to frighten her with fabricated environmental liabilities to push for a quick sale. How thoughtful of Frank to share Apex's environmental concerns, Richard remarked dryly. Dad, this is serious, Thomas insisted. If Eleanor's property has environmental issues, she could face significant liability. Remediation costs alone could exceed the land's value, not to mention potential legal complications, Diane added. Buying property with known environmental hazards creates exposure to lawsuits from adjacent landowners. Eleanor folded her hands in her lap to keep them from trembling not from fear, but from anger at the manipulation unfolding. Fortunately, Thomas continued, Frank has connected us with a buyer who understands these risks and is still willing to make a fair offer. $90,000. Eleanor, that's a significant profit on your investment, even after accounting for the mineral rights purchase. This buyer, Peter asked carefully, would they happen to be connected to Apex Energy? A flicker of surprise crossed Thomas's face. It's a subsidiary called Meridian Development. They specialize in rehabilitating environmentally challenged properties. Eleanor and Peter exchanged knowing glances. Meridian, the same company that had attempted to hire Dr. Clark away just days earlier. The offer expires tomorrow, Diane added, urgency in her voice. They need a decision quickly because of the government land auction on Monday. This is an opportunity to exit a potentially disastrous investment with a profit. Eleanor, you need to take it. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to Eleanor. She could feel the weight of expectation from Thomas and Diane, the concern from her mother, and the supportive presence of her father and Peter. I appreciate everyone's concern, she said finally, keeping her voice steady. But I'm not selling the property. Eleanor, be reasonable, Thomas urged. $90,000 is a generous offer given the potential liabilities. There are no environmental liabilities, Eleanor stated firmly. I had comprehensive testing done before purchase. The soil composition is entirely natural and poses no hazards. Diane leaned forward. Frank says Apex's tests show otherwise. I'm sure they do, Eleanor replied, unable to keep a hint of bitterness from her voice. Apex has a vested interest in acquiring my property cheaply. Manufacturing environmental concerns would be consistent with their business practices. You think Frank is lying? Thomas asked incredulously. I think Frank is representing his client's interests, Eleanor corrected. And his client is Apex, not me. Margaret looked confused. I don't understand why Apex would be interested in worthless desert land. Isn't that what you all said it was? A tense silence followed, broken by Richard's calm voice. Perhaps it isn't as worthless as some have assumed, he suggested. Eleanor spent 2 years researching before purchasing. Maybe her geological expertise revealed potential that others missed? Thomas's eyes narrowed. What kind of potential? Eleanor chose her words carefully. The property has significant renewable energy development possibilities. The specific details are covered by confidentiality agreements with my consultants. Confidentiality agreements, Diane repeated skeptically. For desert scrubland, for specialized geological analysis, Eleanor clarified. The kind that major energy companies pay substantial fees to obtain? Greg, who had been quiet until now, suddenly looked more interested. As a commercial real estate developer, He recognized the language of valuable proprietary information. Are we talking about solar development potential? He asked. Among other possibilities, Eleanor acknowledged, grateful for the reasonable question. Other possibilities like what? Thomas pressed. Like I said, I'm bound by confidentiality agreements regarding specifics, Eleanor repeated. But I can tell you that Monday's government land auction will likely provide clarity about the region's perceived value. You're being deliberately vague, Diane accused. I'm being professionally responsible, Eleanor countered. And frankly, I'm disturbed that members of my own family would push me to make a rushed decision based on information from someone clearly representing a corporate interest. Thomas at least had the grace to look uncomfortable. I'm just trying to help you avoid potential problems, Eleanor. By pressuring me to sell to a company with a documented history of ethical violations, Eleanor asked pointedly. The same company that fired me for raising safety concerns that later proved accurate? That's not fair, Thomas protested. I didn't know Meridian was connected to Apex until Peter mentioned it. Peter raised an eyebrow. Really? You didn't research the buyer before advocating for their offer? That seems unlike you, Thomas. The implied criticism hung in the air. Thomas was meticulous in his legal practice. The failure to investigate Meridian's corporate relationships seemed a significant oversight. Enough, Richard said firmly. This conversation is becoming counterproductive. Here's what's going to happen. Eleanor will not be making any decisions about her property tonight, after Monday's land auction. When we have more information about regional development interest, we can revisit the discussion as a family. But the offer expires tomorrow, Diane objected. Then it expires, Richard stated with military finality. No, Mitchell makes major financial decisions under artificial time pressure. That's been my principle for 40 years, and it applies to Eleanor's situation now. Margaret, sensing the tension, rose to her feet. I think we could all use some dessert. I made your favorite apple pie, Eleanor. As the family moved somewhat reluctantly toward the dining room, Eleanor felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. She'd navigated the immediate pressure, but Monday's government land auction would likely reveal the true extent of corporate interest in the region and the potential challenges ahead. Her phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Clark. Spotted survey teams from multiple energy companies at public viewpoints near your property today. Auction interest building? Stay vigilant. The battle for her desert wasteland was just beginning. Monday morning dawned clear and cold as Eleanor, Peter, and Richard arrived at the county administrative building for the government land auction. They had decided to attend in person rather than monitor online, wanting to observe firsthand which companies showed interest in the parcels adjacent to Eleanor's property. The auction room was more crowded than Eleanor had anticipated. Representatives from at least 6 energy companies occupied the front rows. Their attention focused on the detailed maps displayed on easels near the auctioneer's podium. She recognized logos from Apex Energy, SolarTech Innovations, and Western Resource Development major players in the renewable energy and mineral extraction sectors. More interest than expected for a worthless desert, Peter murmured as they took seats near the back. Richard nodded grimly. And look who else decided to attend? Eleanor followed his gaze to see Thomas entering the room, accompanied by Frank Bailey. Her brother appeared tense, his lawyer's instinct for significant events apparently overriding his weekend assurances to their father that he would step back from the situation. Should we approach them? Peter asked quietly. No, Richard decided. Better to observe for now, see who they interact with. The auction began promptly at 10 Euro a.m. with the county administrator explaining the parcels available and the bidding procedures. 2,000 acres of federal land were being offered, divided into 4 500-acre parcels. The minimum bid was set at $500 per acre, standard pricing for undeveloped desert land with no confirmed resources. Eleanor's heart raced as the first parcel came up for bid, the section directly adjacent to her property's eastern boundary, where her geological surveys had indicated the highest lithium concentrations extended. Opening bid for Parcel A, 500 acres. Do I hear $250,000, the minimum bid? A representative from Western Resource Development raised his paddle. $250,000? I have $250,000. Do I hear $300,000? The SolarTech representative nodded. $300,000. Eleanor did the quick calculation, $600 per acre, already above typical desert land pricing. What followed stunned even Eleanor, who had anticipated significant interest. Within minutes, the bidding for Parcel A had reached $1.5 million or $3,000 per acre, 6 times the minimum bid. The contest had narrowed to Apex Energy and SolarTech, with other companies dropping out as the price climbed. I have $1.5 million from SolarTech, Do I hear $1.6 million? The Apex representative conferred briefly with colleagues before raising his paddle. $2 million. A murmur ran through the room. The jump from $1.5 million to $2 million was aggressive, suggesting Apex had information that justified the premium. $2 million for Parcel A. Do I hear $2.1 million? The Solar Tech team huddled in urgent discussion, clearly trying to determine if the parcel could justify such a price. $2 million going once, twice, $2.2 million, the Solar Tech representative called out, his voice strained. Apex's response was immediate. $3 million? The room fell silent. At $6,000 per acre, the bid was unprecedented for undeveloped desert land. Solar Tech's team shook their heads, unwilling to go higher. $3 million going once, twice. Sold to Apex Energy for $3 million. Eleanor's hand found Peter's arm, gripping it tightly. Apex had just paid 12 times the minimum bid for land adjacent to her property. There could be no doubt now they had data confirming the lithium deposits. The pattern repeated with the remaining parcels, though at somewhat lower prices. By auction's end, Apex had secured all 2,000 acres surrounding Eleanor's property for a total of $9.8 million, an average of $4,900 per acre, for land that would typically sell for $500. As people began filing out of the auction room, Eleanor noticed Frank Bailey speaking intently with Thomas, both men looking troubled by the auction results. I think Thomas just realized he was pushing you to sell valuable property for pennies on the dollar, Peter observed. Let's hope that realization leads to some reconsideration of his position, Richard added. Eleanor's phone buzzed with a text. Dr. Clark again. Auction results confirm our analysis. Multiple companies have the data. Critical phase begins now. Need to meet ASAP. Before she could respond, Thomas approached their group, his expression a complex mixture of confusion and concern. Frank Bailey had departed, perhaps unwilling to face Richard directly. Eleanor? Thomas began awkwardly. I think we need to talk about what just happened. Yes, we do, she agreed calmly, but not here. Those prices, Thomas continued, lowering his voice. No one pays $6,000 an acre for desert unless they know something about its value that isn't publicly available. Eleanor finished for him, something a geological expert might have discovered through extensive research. Thomas had the grace to look chastened. The Meridian offer, $90,000 for your property, would have been the theft of the century, Peter supplied, unable to keep the edge from his voice. I didn't know, Thomas insisted, though his legal training and due diligence made this claim difficult to fully credit. We'll discuss it later, Richard interjected firmly. Right now, we need to get Eleanor somewhere secure. The auction results have changed the dynamic significantly. As they moved toward the exit, Eleanor noticed a woman observing their group with particular interest. Early 50s, sharply dressed in a charcoal suit, with short silver hair and the confident bearing of someone accustomed to authority. Something about her seemed vaguely familiar, though Eleanor couldn't place her. Dr. Mitchell? Eleanor turned, surprised at being addressed by her professional title, something that had happened less frequently since her departure from Apex. Yes, the woman extended her hand. Vera Reynolds, former chief science officer at Apex Energy. I believe we need to talk. The name hit Eleanor like a physical blow. Vera Reynolds, the executive who had signed her termination papers 3 years ago, after the Wyoming site warnings. I have nothing to say to Apex representatives, Eleanor replied coldly, turning to leave. I no longer work for Apex, Reynolds said quickly. I left shortly after your warnings about the Wyoming site proved accurate. That's actually what I want to discuss with you, along with what you've discovered about your Nevada property. Eleanor hesitated, studying the woman skeptically. Why should I trust anything you say? Reynolds glanced around the emptying auction room. Because I have internal Apex documents confirming your Wyoming analysis was correct and deliberately suppressed. And because I know exactly what's beneath your 200 acres of worthless desert and what Apex plans to do to obtain it, Richard stepped forward, his military assessment of potential threats evident in his posture. Any discussion will happen on our terms, in a location of our choosing, with appropriate legal representation present. Reynolds nodded, seemingly unsurprised by the caution. Of course, here's my card. Call the personal number when you're ready to meet, but don't wait too long. Apex doesn't rely solely on auctions to get what it wants. As Reynolds walked away, Thomas stared after her in confusion. What is going on, Eleanor? What exactly did you find in that desert? Eleanor exchanged glances with her father and Peter before answering. The future of American energy production, she said simply, and possibly the fight of my life. 2 hours after the auction, Eleanor sat in Dr. Clark's university office alongside her father, Peter, Thomas, and their unexpected guest, Vera Reynolds. The tension in the room was palpable as Dr. Clark pulled up satellite imagery of the auction parcels and Eleanor's property on his computer. Based on today's auction results, Dr. Clark began, it's clear that multiple companies have geological data confirming what our research identified. The lithium deposits extend throughout this region, with the highest concentration centered here. He pointed to Eleanor's property. What they may not realize is the unique combination of factors that make Ms. Mitchell's parcel particularly valuable. Thomas leaned forward, his legal mind clearly processing implications. Just to be clear, we're talking about lithium deposits, as in the mineral essential for electric vehicle batteries, not just any lithium deposits. Vera Reynolds interjected. Preliminary surveys suggest this could be one of the largest undiscovered lithium resources in North America. Combined with the site's exceptional solar potential, it creates a perfect storm of value for renewable energy development. Eleanor studied Reynolds cautiously. Why are you sharing this information? Until recently, you were Apex's chief science officer. A shadow crossed Reynolds' face. I left Apex for ethical reasons. The Wyoming incident was the beginning. Your warnings were correct, but when I advocated for halting operations, I was overruled by financial considerations. 3 workers were injured as a result. I remember, Eleanor said quietly. I testified in their workers' compensation hearings. After that, Reynolds continued, I began documenting similar incidence cases where scientific data was ignored or suppressed when it conflicted with quarterly profit projections. When I presented my findings to the board, I was offered early retirement with a generous severance package and strict non-disclosure agreements, which you're violating by being here, Richard observed. Reynolds smiled thinly. The NDAs covered specific incidents, not general business practices. I'm being careful about what I share. Besides, I now work for Green Future Capital, an investment fund specializing in sustainable energy development. Peter's eyebrows rose. I know Green Future. They've built a reputation for ethical investment in renewable projects. That's right, Reynolds nodded. And we're very interested in what your sister has discovered. But more importantly, I'm here to warn her about what's coming. Eleanor felt a chill. What exactly is coming? Apex just spent nearly $10 million securing the land surrounding your property? Reynolds explained. They won't let 200 acres of private holdings, no matter how strategically located, derail their development plans. First, they'll approach with a seemingly generous offer, likely around $20 million. Thomas let out a low whistle. When that's rejected, Reynolds continued, they'll escalate to less ethical tactics, environmental challenges, access disputes, potentially even manufactured safety concerns. Their goal will be to pressure you into selling by making development impossible or prohibitively expensive. Can they do that? Thomas asked, his legal instincts engaged. They can try, Reynolds replied. The question is whether Eleanor has the resources and support to withstand the pressure until a better option emerges. What kind of better option? Richard asked. Reynolds exchanged glances with Dr. Clark before continuing. Green Future Capital represents a consortium of investors committed to ethical resource development. We're prepared to discuss a partnership that would provide Eleanor with the financial and legal resources to resist Apex's pressure while developing the property responsibly. Dr. Clark nodded. I've reviewed their preliminary proposal. It's structured to balance economic returns with environmental responsibility and community benefits. Eleanor felt overwhelmed by the rapid escalation of events. Just a week ago, her family had been staging interventions over her desert obsession. Now corporate executives were discussing multi-million-dollar offers and development partnerships. I need time to process all this, she said finally. Of course, Reynolds agreed, but not too much time. Apex will move quickly after today's auction results. As if on cue, Eleanor's phone rang with an unknown number. She glanced at the screen, then at the others in the room. Should I answer it? Put it on speaker, Richard suggested. Let's see who's calling. Eleanor activated the speakerphone. Hello, Dr. Mitchell. This is Marcus Brennan from Apex Energy's Acquisition Division. I'm calling regarding your property in Nevada. Everyone in the room exchanged glances. Reynolds mouthed silently. It's starting? Yes, Mr. Brennan. Eleanor replied carefully. I'd like to schedule a meeting to discuss a potential purchase offer. Our company has recently acquired land adjacent to your parcel, and we're interested in consolidating holdings in the area for a major development project. Eleanor took a deep breath. What kind of development project? I'd prefer to discuss the details in person, Brennan replied smoothly. Would tomorrow morning be convenient? We could meet at your property to walk the site together. Reynolds shook her head vigorously. I'm afraid tomorrow doesn't work for me, Eleanor said. And I prefer to have my legal and financial advisors present for any such discussions. There was a brief pause. Of course, would later this week be possible? Our timeline for this project is rather compressed. I'll need to consult with my team, Eleanor replied. I'll contact you when I've had a chance to coordinate schedules. After ending the call, Reynolds leaned forward. They're moving even faster than I anticipated. Brennan is their lead negotiator for high-value acquisitions. What would have happened if Eleanor had agreed to meet him alone at the property tomorrow? Peter asked. Reynolds' expression was grim. Best case, intense pressure tactics. Worst case, they'd already have surveyors and equipment positioned to create the impression that development was inevitable, regardless of her decision. Thomas looked troubled. Frank never mentioned any of this when he connected me with Meridian Development. He presented it as a favor helping Eleanor avoid potential liability issues. Frank Bailey has been an Apex consultant for 15 years, Reynolds informed him. He's their standard contact for identifying and facilitating local property acquisitions. Thomas's face flushed with embarrassment and anger. I was manipulated. We all were, Eleanor said gently, surprising herself with the lack of recrimination she felt. In the face of corporate manipulation, family disagreements seemed suddenly less significant. The question now, Richard interjected, focusing on practical matters as his military training had taught him, is what's our next step? Eleanor needs to make decisions based on complete information and without undue pressure. Dr. Clark pulled up a detailed document on his computer. I prepared an analysis of 3 potential paths forward. First, accepting a direct purchase offer, which would provide immediate financial returns, but surrender control of how the resources are developed. That's what Apex wants, Reynolds added. A quick, clean transaction that gives them complete control. Second, Dr. Clark continued, forming a development partnership with an established energy company. This would reduce Eleanor's immediate return, but provide ongoing revenue sharing and some influence over development approaches. Green Future would propose this structure, Reynolds acknowledged, though our terms would include significant environmental and community benefit provisions. And the third option, Eleanor asked, the most complex but potentially most rewarding. Dr. Clark explained, creating an independent development corporation with Eleanor maintaining majority ownership. This would require substantial outside investment, but preserve maximum control and long-term value. It would also require more time to arrange, Peter noted, time that Apex might not allow if they're determined to acquire the property quickly. Thomas, who had been quietly processing, finally spoke up. There's a fourth option we should consider, legal preemption. Everyone turned to look at him. Explain, Richard requested. If we anticipate Apex will use environmental challenges or access disputes to pressure Eleanor, Thomas elaborated, we could preemptively file for judicial review of those potential claims, essentially asking the court to declare her property free from environmental liabilities and confirming her access rights before Apex can challenge them. Reynolds looked impressed. That's actually quite clever. It would neutralize 2 of their standard pressure tactics. It would also signal that Eleanor has sophisticated legal representation, Thomas added, which might make them reconsider aggressive approaches. Eleanor studied her brother, seeing a familiar determination in his expression, but now directed toward helping her rather than saving her from herself. Would you be willing to handle that aspect, Thomas? She asked. He met her gaze directly. Absolutely. Consider it my apology for not doing proper due diligence on Meridian and Frank Bailey. We should also secure the property physically, Richard suggested. After spending nearly $10 million at the auction, Apex might attempt unauthorized surveys or testing on Eleanor's land to gather additional data. I have some former military colleagues who now work in private security, Reynolds offered, professionals who understand discretion and have experience with resource development sites. As the discussion continued, Eleanor felt both overwhelmed and strangely empowered. For the first time since leaving Apex, she was surrounded by people who recognized her expertise and respected her judgment, including family members who had recently questioned her sanity. There's something else we need to discuss, she said finally, as the immediate security and legal contingencies had been addressed. Mom and Diane, they don't know anything about this yet. An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Mom will worry herself sick, Thomas observed, and Diane will immediately push for accepting the highest offer to eliminate risk, Peter added. Richard considered the dilemma. Margaret deserves to know what's happening, especially if there are potential security concerns. As for Diane, he hesitated, diplomatic even about his most difficult child. Diane will need carefully managed information, Thomas suggested. Full disclosure might be counterproductive given her risk-averse approach to investments. That's an elegant way of saying my sister would try to bulldoze me into taking the money and running, Eleanor remarked dryly. Essentially, yes, Thomas admitted. I'll talk to Mom. Eleanor decided. Tonight, with Dad present for support, Diane can receive a more limited briefing once we've developed a clearer strategy. As the meeting concluded and action items were assigned, Reynolds drew Eleanor aside. There's something you should know, she said quietly. Apex's interest isn't solely about the lithium deposits. Their internal research suggests your property is ideal for an integrated development extraction, processing, and manufacturing in a single location. It's potentially the future of American battery production. Eleanor processed this information, which makes it even more important that development happens responsibly, with proper environmental safeguards. Reynolds nodded. Exactly. That's why I left Apex and joined Green Future. Some resources are too important to be developed solely for quarterly profits. As Eleanor prepared to leave, Dr. Clark approached with a thick folder. I've compiled all our research data, analysis, and projections, he said, handing it to her. Keep this secure. It represents 2 years of your work and contains information worth millions. Eleanor accepted the folder, suddenly struck by how her quiet, methodical research had transformed into something with such enormous implications. Thank you, Ben, she said sincerely, for believing in me when few others did. The older professor smiled. Science is about evidence, not popularity. Your analysis was sound from the beginning. I'm just glad to see it finally recognized. Outside the university building, Eleanor found Thomas waiting by his car. I owe you an apology, he said without preamble. I should have trusted your judgment instead of assuming I knew better. You thought you were protecting me? Eleanor acknowledged. Though a bit more research into Meridian might have been prudent, Thomas winced. I let Frank leverage our friendship without proper verification, a rookie mistake I'd never make for a client. Family dynamics can cloud professional judgment, Eleanor offered graciously. Still, Thomas insisted, I should have remembered that you've always been the most methodical of all of us. Even as kids, you never made moves without calculating all possible outcomes. The observation, so similar to what their father had said during his visit to her property, touched Eleanor deeply. Perhaps her family did know her, even when they didn't understand her choices. Water under the bridge, she assured him. What matters now is moving forward as a united front. Thomas nodded, then hesitated before adding, Diane isn't going to take this well. She's already convinced your desert obsession is some kind of emotional response to your divorce and Apex firing. Eleanor sighed. I know, but I'm hoping that 9-figure development potential might convince her I'm not completely irrational. Just be prepared, Thomas warned. When Diane feels outmaneuvered, she can become defensive. As Eleanor drove home that evening, her mind raced with everything that had transpired. In a single day, her property had transformed from a foolish investment in her family's eyes to the center of a potential corporate battle worth hundreds of millions. The validation was gratifying, but the responsibility sobering. Her phone buzzed with a text from Peter. Apex representatives asking questions at County Records Office about your property boundaries and access roads. Thomas already working on legal preemption strategy. Stay alert. The game was indeed advancing quickly. Eleanor's quiet research project had evolved into something that would require all her scientific expertise, her family's support, and perhaps more courage than she knew she possessed. Margaret Mitchell's hands trembled slightly as she set down her teacup. The kitchen, normally her domain of comfort and control, felt suddenly unfamiliar as she processed what Eleanor and Richard had just explained. Lithium, she repeated, the word sounding strange in her mouth. All this time, you've been researching lithium deposits. Eleanor nodded. Among other geological features, the property's value comes from a unique combination of mineral resources and renewable energy potential. And these companies, Margaret continued, struggling to comprehend the magnitude, they're willing to pay millions, potentially hundreds of millions, depending on the development structure, Richard confirmed gently. The auction results today confirm that multiple companies recognize the region's value. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. Oh, Eleanor, and we all thought, we were so worried that you were. I know, Mom, Eleanor said softly, reaching across the table to take her mother's hand. You were concerned because you love me. You couldn't have known what I'd discovered. But we should have trusted you, Margaret insisted. Instead of assuming you were making emotional decisions, we should have remembered how methodical you've always been. The validation from her mother echoing what both Richard and Thomas had expressed settled something deep in Eleanor's heart. Perhaps the most valuable outcome of this discovery wasn't the potential wealth, but the restoration of her family's confidence in her judgment. There's something else you need to understand, Richard said carefully. The situation involves some risk. Companies like Apex don't always operate ethically when valuable resources are involved. Margaret's expression shifted from wonder to concern. What kind of risk? Eleanor explained about the potential pressure tactics, legal challenges, and security concerns, careful to be honest without causing undue alarm. That's why we've engaged Thomas for legal protection and are arranging property security, she concluded. We're taking every precaution. Margaret was quiet for a long moment, processing everything. When she finally spoke, her voice carried surprising strength. I want to be clear about something, she said, looking directly at Eleanor. Whatever you decide to do with this property, whatever approach you choose for development, your father and I support you completely. This is your discovery, your investment, your decision. Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. After months of interventions and concerned discussions about her obsession, her mother's unconditional support was unexpectedly moving. Thank you, Mom, she managed. That means more than you know. There's just one more thing, Margaret added, a familiar maternal determination entering her voice. Diane, she's going to be difficult about this. Richard and Eleanor exchanged knowing glances. We're developing a strategy for informing her, Richard assured his wife, though her initial reaction may be challenging. Margaret snorted softly. That's putting it mildly. Our eldest has never handled being wrong very gracefully. She shook her head. I'll talk to her first. Prepare the ground, mother to daughter. Are you sure? Eleanor asked, surprised by the offer. Margaret typically avoided confrontation, especially with Diane. Absolutely, her mother replied with unexpected firmness. It's time I reminded my eldest that her younger sister has always been the scientific genius of this family, even if the rest of us sometimes forgot it. As Eleanor and Richard prepared to leave, Margaret suddenly embraced her daughter with fierce protectiveness. Be careful, Eleanor, she whispered. Some things are more valuable than money or professional vindication. Promise me you'll prioritize your safety through all of this. I promise, Mom, Eleanor assured her, touched by her mother's concern. I have good people helping me navigate this. And family, Margaret added, her voice firm. You have family. Don't forget that. The conference room at the Reno Marquis Hotel hummed with tension as Eleanor and her team prepared for their first official meeting with Apex Energy representatives. 2 days had passed since the government land auction, days filled with frantic preparation, security arrangements, and legal maneuvers orchestrated by Thomas. Eleanor sat at the center of her side of the table, flanked by Thomas and Peter. Richard sat slightly apart as an observer, while Dr. Wade Clark arranged technical materials for presentation. Vera Reynolds had recused herself from this initial meeting, concerned that her presence might inflame Apex executives who viewed her departure as a betrayal. Remember, Thomas advised quietly, let them present first. We want to understand exactly what they're offering before revealing our position. Eleanor nodded, trying to project confidence despite her racing heart. This meeting represented everything she had worked toward since her unceremonious dismissal from Apex 3 years earlier: professional vindication, recognition of her geological expertise, and potentially financial independence on a scale she had never imagined. At precisely 10:00 a.m., the Apex delegation entered. Marcus Brennan, the acquisition specialist who had called Eleanor, led the team of 4 executives. Eleanor recognized Michael Foster, Apex's chief operating officer, a fact that underscored the importance the company placed on this negotiation. Dr. Mitchell, Brennan began after introductions were complete. Thank you for agreeing to this meeting. We appreciate your time and the opportunity to discuss our interest in your property. Of course, Eleanor replied neutrally. I understand Apex has made significant investments in the surrounding parcels. Brennan smiled. Indeed. As you may have gathered from the auction, we have substantial development plans for the region. Your property occupies a strategic position within our proposed project area. Michael Foster leaned forward. Dr. Mitchell, I'll be direct. Our geological surveys indicate significant lithium deposits throughout the region, with particularly favorable concentrations in your 200 acres. We're prepared to make a generous offer for outright purchase. What kind of offer? Thomas asked, maintaining the professional demeanor that had made him a respected corporate attorney. Foster nodded to one of his colleagues, who distributed folders to everyone at the table. $25 million cash transaction with closing possible within 30 days. Peter opened the folder, reviewing the terms while maintaining a carefully neutral expression. $25 million, a 45,000% return on Eleanor's initial investment would be life-changing money by any standard. That's certainly a substantial offer, Thomas acknowledged. May I ask what Apex envisions for the property? Foster seemed pleased by the question. We're planning an integrated lithium development extraction, processing, and battery component manufacturing in a single location. It would be the first such facility in North America and potentially transform the entire region's economy. Creating how many jobs? Richard asked, speaking for the first time. Approximately 2,500 during construction and 200 permanent positions once operational, Foster replied. Average salary for permanent positions would be around $80,000 annually. Eleanor studied the development plans included in the folder. The technical approach was sound, but environmental considerations appeared minimal, typical of Apex's profit-first approach. Your offer is generous, she said carefully, but I noticed limited detail regarding environmental safeguards, particularly for water usage and habitat protection. Foster's smile tightened slightly. Rest assured, we'll comply with all applicable regulations. Our environmental impact statement will address those concerns in detail once development begins. After the purchase is complete, Thomas noted, picking up on the implication, with no contractual guarantees regarding specific protection measures. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Perhaps, Eleanor suggested, we should discuss alternative structures beyond outright purchase. Joint development agreements, for instance, or phased acquisition with performance requirements. Foster exchanged glances with Brennan before responding. We prefer clean transactions. Dr. Mitchell, $25 million provides you complete liquidity while allowing us operational flexibility. Operational flexibility, Peter repeated thoughtfully, meaning limited external oversight of development methods. Foster's expression hardened slightly. Mr. Mitchell, Apex Energy has developed resources responsibly across multiple states. Our record speaks for itself. Indeed it does, Thomas agreed, a hint of steel entering his voice. Including the Wyoming incident that injured 3 workers after safety warnings were ignored. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Ancient history, Foster dismissed. Lessons were learned, procedures improved. Our focus today is the extraordinary opportunity before us. $25 million is life-changing wealth. Dr. Mitchell, you could pursue any ambition, free from financial constraints. Eleanor felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her. The offer was substantial, representing more money than she had ever expected to possess. Yet something about Foster's dismissive attitude toward environmental concerns and safety records troubled her deeply. I appreciate Apex's interest, she said finally. However, I need to evaluate all options before making a decision of this magnitude. My team will review your proposal in detail and respond within 2 weeks. Foster's smile didn't reach his eyes. I should mention that our offer is time-sensitive. Market conditions and project timelines necessitate a response within 5 business days. Artificial time pressure is rarely conducive to sound decision-making, Richard observed mildly, his military experience with negotiation tactics evident. Not artificial, Colonel Mitchell, Foster countered. Our development schedule requires beginning preliminary work by next quarter to meet contractual obligations with battery manufacturers. Thomas closed his folder. Nevertheless, Dr. Mitchell will require 2 weeks for proper evaluation. Complex decisions deserve thorough analysis. Foster studied the family arrayed before him, perhaps recognizing the unified front they presented. Very well, 2 weeks. But I should note that our offer reflects the current competitive landscape. Should other interested parties emerge with competing development plans, market dynamics might necessitate reassessment. The implied threat was clear: accept quickly or risk a reduced offer. As the Apex team departed, Eleanor felt a complex mixture of emotions: validation that her geological research had been correct, satisfaction at the substantial offer, but lingering concern about Apex's approach to development. $25 million. Peter whistled softly once they were alone. That's significantly higher than Reynolds predicted for their opening offer, which suggests they value the property even more than we realized, Thomas noted. Their aggressive auction bidding wasn't an anomaly? Dr. Clark, who had remained silent during the meeting, spread out his technical materials now. Their development plan confirms our analysis about the lithium concentration, but their extraction approach would compromise long-term yield for short-term profit, classic Apex methodology. What do you mean? Eleanor asked, studying the technical diagrams. Their proposed extraction method would recover approximately 65% of available lithium. Dr. Clark explained. More sustainable approaches could yield 80–85%, but would require longer development timelines and higher initial investment. Richard frowned. They're planning to leave 20% of the resource in the ground because extracting it would delay profit realization. Precisely, Dr. Clark confirmed. It's economically rational from a quarterly earnings perspective, but environmentally irresponsible and wasteful of a strategic resource. Eleanor sat back, processing this information. So they're offering $25 million for a resource they intend to develop inefficiently, potentially leaving hundreds of millions in value unrealized while causing greater environmental impact. That appears to be the case. Thomas agreed. The question is, what alternative approaches might be viable before anyone could respond? Eleanor's phone rang. Vera Reynolds' name appeared on the display. Reynolds, she answered, putting the call on speaker. You'll be interested to know Apex offered $25 million, not 20 as you predicted. That's actually why I'm calling, Reynolds replied, her voice tight with urgency. Green Future has received information that Electra Motors is conducting their own geological assessment of the region. The name sent a ripple of interest through the room. Electra Motors was America's leading electric vehicle manufacturer, known for vertical integration of their supply chain and commitment to sustainable practices. How reliable is this information? Richard asked. Very, Reynolds confirmed. Their chief battery officer was spotted at the county assessor's office reviewing property records, including the boundaries of Eleanor's parcel. Peter leaned forward. Electra would be interested in the lithium for their vehicle batteries. Not just interested, Reynolds clarified. Potentially desperate. Their current supply contracts are predominantly with Chinese producers, creating significant vulnerability in their supply chain. A major domestic lithium source would be strategically invaluable to them. Thomas's legal mind immediately grasped the implications, which means we potentially have competing corporate interests, creating leverage for negotiations. Exactly, Reynolds agreed. Apex's aggressive timeline suddenly makes more sense. They're trying to lock down the acquisition before Electra can formulate a competing offer. Eleanor exchanged glances with her family members, seeing the same realization dawning across their faces. What had initially seemed like a straightforward if substantial property transaction was evolving into a high-stakes corporate chess match with national strategic implications. What would Electra's approach likely entail? She asked Reynolds. Based on their corporate history, probably a more integrated proposal. Reynolds replied. They tend to prioritize long-term resource maximization over short-term profit, given their need for stable supply chains, which aligns better with responsible development, Dr. Clark noted. We need more information before making any decisions. Eleanor determined. Reynolds, can you arrange a discreet meeting with Electra representatives? Not a formal negotiation, but an exploratory discussion. I believe so, Reynolds confirmed, though we'll need to be careful about timing. If Apex learns about competing interests too soon, they might employ more aggressive tactics. As the call ended and the team discussed next steps, Eleanor felt both exhilarated and sobered by the escalating stakes. Her worthless desert had become the focus of competition between billion-dollar corporations, with implications for American manufacturing, renewable energy development, and her own future. One day at a time, Richard reminded her gently, recognizing the overwhelmed look in his daughter's eyes. Focus on the next right decision, not the entire path forward. Eleanor nodded gratefully. Her father's military wisdom breaking complex challenges into manageable actions provided a framework for navigating the uncharted territory ahead. And remember, Peter added, you're not facing this alone. We're with you every step of the way. The family solidarity, so different from the intervention attempts of just weeks earlier, gave Eleanor strength as she prepared to make decisions that would affect not just her future, but potentially the future of American energy independence. The evening gathering at Richard and Margaret's home carried a different energy than the tense family interventions of the past. Eleanor, Peter, and Thomas had arrived early to help prepare for Diane's arrival. Each cognizant of the delicate conversation ahead, Margaret moved between kitchen and dining room with nervous energy, arranging and rearranging place settings. I've made her favorite lasagna, she said, more to herself than anyone else. That should help, shouldn't it? Richard placed a gentle hand on his wife's shoulder. The food won't matter, Margaret. This is about family dynamics, not culinary preferences. I know, she sighed. I just want this to go smoothly. Diane can be so... Diane when she feels challenged. Eleanor exchanged knowing glances with her brothers. Their oldest siblings need to be right to be the successful one, the wise one. The one with all the answers had been a family dynamic since childhood. Tonight would test those patterns significantly. The doorbell rang precisely at 7:00 p.m. Diane was nothing if not punctual. Just me tonight, she announced as she entered, kissing her mother's cheek. Greg's watching the kids. Mom said it was important family business. Her eyes narrowed slightly, seeing all her siblings already present. Is this another intervention? Because I thought we'd established that Eleanor's desert purchase wasn't quite the disaster we initially believed. It's not an intervention, Richard assured her, taking her coat. More of an update on recent developments. Diane's gaze sharpened, her real estate developer's instincts engaged. What kind of developments? Let's sit down for dinner first, Margaret suggested, ushering everyone toward the dining room. We can discuss everything over food. The initial conversation remained deliberately light work updates, children's activities, community news. Eleanor noticed Thomas checking his watch periodically, a habit from his legal practice when preparing for a difficult cross-examination. As Margaret served dessert homemade tiramisu, another of Diane's favorites, Richard cleared his throat gently. Diane, we've asked you here tonight to share some significant information about Eleanor's property. Diane set down her dessert fork, her posture straightening. Has someone made an offer? Frank Bailey mentioned there might be interest despite the environmental concerns. There have been developments regarding the property's value, Richard confirmed carefully. Developments that change our understanding of Eleanor's investment, Thomas took over smoothly. Monday's government land auction revealed substantial corporate interest in the region. Apex Energy acquired 2,000 acres surrounding Eleanor's property for nearly $10 million. Diane's eyebrows rose. $10 million for desert land? That's... She paused, mental calculations clearly running. That's nearly $5,000 per acre. Nobody pays that for undeveloped desert unless... Her gaze snapped to Eleanor. What did you find out there? Eleanor took a deep breath. Lithium deposits, substantial ones, combined with ideal conditions for solar energy development, creating what may be the most valuable energy parcel in Nevada. Silence fell over the table as Diane processed this information, her expression cycling through disbelief, recalculation, and finally, a complicated mixture of surprise and something less definable. Lithium, she repeated finally, as in electric vehicle batteries and grid-scale energy storage systems, Peter added, essential for renewable energy expansion. How substantial are these deposits? Diane asked, her developer's mind clearly assessing value. Preliminary estimates suggest extraction value between $200 and $300 million, Thomas replied. Combined with the solar potential, total development value could exceed $500 million. Diane's hand trembled slightly as she reached for her water glass. And you've known about this potential for how long? The question carried weight, not just seeking information, but measuring the extent to which she had been excluded from significant family developments. I had strong indications from geological surveys 2 years ago, Eleanor explained honestly. That's why I invested in the property. But confirmation of the lithium concentration only came recently. 2 years, Diane repeated, a hint of hurt entering her voice. You spent 2 years researching this investment, while we all assumed Eleanor was making an emotional decision rather than a calculated investment. Richard completed gently. That's on us. Diane, we underestimated your sister's methodical approach. Diane looked directly at Eleanor now. And Frank Bailey's connection to Meridian Development. The environmental concerns he mentioned manufactured to pressure me into selling cheaply, Eleanor confirmed. Frank consults for Apex Energy, who clearly had their own data about the lithium deposits. Thomas leaned forward. Frank manipulated me too. Diane used our friendship to push a narrative about helping Eleanor avoid liability, when in reality, he was facilitating an attempt to acquire valuable resources for pennies on the dollar. Diane absorbed this, her expression hardening. So we were being played, all of us. By corporate interests, yes. Richard nodded, which is why we're sharing this information as a family now. Eleanor faces significant decisions and potentially aggressive corporate tactics in the coming weeks. What kind of decisions? Diane asked. Practical as always. Apex Energy has offered $25 million for outright purchase, Peter explained. But there are concerns about their development approach and environmental practices. And Electromotors has expressed interest as well, Eleanor added, creating potential for competing offers or partnership structures. Diane's eyes widened. Electra, the electric vehicle manufacturer. Eleanor nodded. They're interested in securing domestic lithium supplies for their battery production. $25 million, dollars, Diane said slowly, processing the figure. That's that's life-changing money. Eleanor? It is, Eleanor agreed, but this isn't just about money. It's about responsible resource development, environmental stewardship, and potentially America's energy future. Diane studied her younger sister with new eyes, perhaps seeing for the first time not the impulsive sibling who needed guidance, but a professional with expertise and vision. I owe you an apology, she said finally, the words clearly difficult for her. I assumed you were making emotional decisions after your divorce and the Apex firing. I never considered you might have specialized knowledge that justified the investment. The admission, so similar to what Thomas had expressed after the auction, touched Eleanor deeply. Thank you, Diane, she said simply. That means a lot. So, what happens now? Diane asked, her practical nature reasserting itself. We're exploring options beyond Apex's direct purchase offer, Eleanor explained. Joint development agreements, partnership structures, possibly even creating an independent development corporation. Each approach has different financial implications and control considerations, Peter added. We're conducting comprehensive analysis before making any recommendations. Diane nodded thoughtfully. You need real estate development expertise, structured partnerships, phased development rights, conditional access agreements. These are all specialized areas. We do, Thomas agreed. That's actually one reason we wanted to brief you tonight. Your experience with complex development projects could be valuable to Eleanor's decision-making process. Diane looked surprised, then pleased by the acknowledgement of her professional expertise. I'd be happy to help analyze the offers and structure. Greg's firm has handled several energy development land deals, nothing of this magnitude, but the principles are similar. As the conversation continued, Eleanor observed a subtle shift in family dynamics. For perhaps the first time in their adult lives, all four Mitchell siblings were collaborating as equals, each contributing their professional expertise toward a common goal. There's one more thing you should know, Richard said as the evening wound down. The situation involves some security concerns. Apex may employ aggressive tactics to pressure Eleanor into selling. Diane's expression grew serious. What kind of tactics? Potentially unauthorized surveys, environmental challenges, access disputes, Thomas explained. We're implementing legal protections and physical security measures as precautions. My property is secure, Diane said immediately. If Eleanor needs a safer place to stay temporarily, our guest house is available. Better security system than most banks. The offer, practical, immediate, and generous, represented a significant evolution in Diane's approach to her younger sister. Thank you, Eleanor said sincerely. I may take you up on that depending on how negotiations develop. As the family prepared to depart, Diane pulled Eleanor aside. I'm still processing all of this, she admitted. The scale, the implications. It's a lot to absorb. I know, Eleanor acknowledged. I'm still adjusting myself. But I want you to know something. Diane continued, meeting her sister's eyes directly. Whatever you decide about this property, whatever development approach you choose, I support you completely. This is your discovery, your expertise, your decision. The echo of Margaret's words from days earlier wasn't lost on Eleanor. Perhaps the most valuable outcome of this whole experience wasn't the potential wealth, but the restoration of her family's trust and respect. That means more than you know, she told her sister sincerely. Diane smiled, a hint of her characteristic confidence returning. Besides, having a billionaire sister could be quite useful. I've always wanted to vacation on a private island. Eleanor laughed, relieved by the return to their familiar banter. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. We're a long way from private islands. Maybe, Diane conceded. But for someone who turned worthless desert into a corporate bidding war, I wouldn't rule anything out. The discreet meeting with Electra Motors representatives took place 3 days later at a private dining room in the Grand Sierra Resort. Eleanor had arrived with Peter, Thomas, and Dr. Clark, while Richard remained at the property overseeing newly installed security measures. Catherine Wong, Electra's chief battery officer, led a team of 4 executives whose presence signaled the company's serious interest. Tall, precisely dressed, with an engineer's attentive gaze, Wong carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had ascended through technical expertise rather than political maneuvering. Dr. Mitchell, she began after introductions were complete, thank you for agreeing to this exploratory discussion. We understand you've recently received an offer from Apex Energy for your Nevada property. News travels fast, Thomas observed neutrally. Wong smiled slightly. The renewable energy sector is smaller than it appears. May I ask the nature of Apex's proposal? 25 million for outright purchase, Peter replied, watching carefully for reactions. Wang and her colleagues exchanged glances, but showed no surprise at the figure. A substantial offer, Wang acknowledged, though perhaps not reflective of the property's full strategic value. Strategic value meaning what, exactly? Eleanor asked. Instead of answering directly, Wang nodded to one of her colleagues, who distributed tablets to everyone at the table. If I may, I'd like to share Electra's vision for what we call integrated resource development. This might provide context for our interest in your property. The tablets displayed a sophisticated multimedia presentation outlining Electra's approach to battery production from mineral extraction through processing, manufacturing, and recycling. Currently, the American battery supply chain depends heavily on foreign sources, Wang explained as the presentation advanced. Lithium primarily from Australia, Chile, and China. Critical processing occurs almost exclusively overseas, creating significant vulnerability in our manufacturing capacity. Dr. Clark studied the technical diagrams with interest. You're proposing vertical integration from extraction to final battery production. Precisely, Wang confirmed. Creating America's first fully integrated battery production ecosystem, from mineral to finished product. Dr. Mitchell's property sits at the heart of what could become this country's most strategic energy resource development. Eleanor considered this framing not just financial value, but national strategic importance. What specifically would this integration mean for my property? Wang's colleague advanced the presentation to detailed site plans. We envision 3 development phases. First, environmentally optimized lithium extraction using closed-loop water systems and minimal surface disruption. Second, on-site processing facilities powered by solar arrays on the property's western section. Third, battery component manufacturing employing advanced automation and sustainability practices. Creating how many jobs? Thomas asked, echoing Richard's question from the Apex meeting. Approximately 3,500 during construction and 2,200 permanent positions, Wang replied, with average salaries of $92,000 for technical roles and minimum $65,000 for support positions. The figure significantly higher than Apex's projections caught everyone's attention. Your extraction method, Dr. Rick Clark inquired, focusing on technical details. What recovery percentage do you target? Our current technology achieves 82% recovery, Wang answered promptly. Our R&D department is testing approaches that could reach 88% within 3 years, compared to Apex's 65%, Eleanor noted, the contrast stark and revealing. Different companies prioritize different metrics, Wang responded diplomatically. Electra believes responsible resource management requires maximizing extraction efficiency, even when that extends development timelines. Peter leaned forward. You've outlined an impressive vision, but haven't mentioned financial terms. What exactly are you proposing? Wang nodded appreciatively at the direct question. We're prepared to discuss several potential structures: direct purchase at competitive valuation, joint development with revenue sharing, or a hybrid approach combining upfront payment with ongoing participation rights. And the valuation range, Thomas pressed. For direct purchase, approximately $40 million, Wang stated calmly. For partnership structures, lower upfront payment, but potentially significantly higher long-term returns through revenue sharing and equity appreciation. The figure, nearly double Apex's offer, elicited no visible reaction from Eleanor or her team, though internally, she felt a surge of validation. Her property's value continued to exceed even her optimistic projections. Beyond financial considerations, Wang continued, Electra would commit to specific environmental and community benefit provisions, water conservation metrics, habitat preservation requirements, local hiring targets, all contractually guaranteed, regardless of ownership structure. Unlike Apex's vague assurances of regulatory compliance, Thomas noted. Wang smiled slightly. Different companies operate with different priorities. Electra believes environmental stewardship and community benefits are compatible with long-term profitability. As the meeting progressed to more detailed discussions of development approaches and timeline considerations, Eleanor found herself increasingly impressed by Electra's technical rigor and sustainability focus. Unlike Apex's emphasis on speed and operational flexibility, Electra presented a vision of responsible development that aligned with her own values. We'd like to propose a site visit with our technical team, Wang concluded as the meeting wound down, to validate our preliminary assessments and refine development concepts. That can be arranged, Eleanor agreed, though we're still in the evaluation phase regarding all potential options. Of course, Wang acknowledged graciously. We understand this is a significant decision requiring thorough analysis. We simply want to ensure you have complete information about Electra's approach before finalizing any agreements. As the Electra team departed, Peter let out a low whistle. 40 million versus 25 million. The difference in valuation is telling. More significant is the difference in development philosophy. Dr. Clark observed. Electra's extraction approach would recover 17% more lithium while creating less environmental impact. That's remarkable. Thomas was reviewing his notes. The contractually guaranteed environmental provisions are substantial, much stronger than Apex's vague regulatory assurances. Eleanor sat quietly, processing everything she had heard. Both companies clearly valued her property highly, but their approaches to development reflected fundamentally different corporate philosophies. Apex's emphasis on speed and quarterly profits versus Electra's focus on sustainability and long-term value. We need to consider more than just the financial offers, she said finally. This decision will affect not just my future, but potentially the future of American energy production and hundreds of families who will depend on these jobs. A responsibility and an opportunity, Peter noted. Eleanor nodded, thinking about how far she had come from the geologist fired for prioritizing safety over production targets. Now she was in position to potentially influence how America's critical energy resources were developed, a vindication more meaningful than even the substantial financial offers. Let's develop a comprehensive comparison, she decided. Financial terms, environmental approaches, community benefits, long-term strategic implications. I want to make this decision based on complete information, not just the highest dollar figure. As they gathered their materials to depart, Eleanor's phone buzzed with a text from Richard. Security team intercepted unauthorized surveyors attempting to access eastern boundary. Apex employees. Situation handled, but suggest escalating pressure tactics. Stay alert. The message reinforced what Reynolds had warned Apex wouldn't rely solely on financial offers to secure what they wanted. The battle for her worthless desert was intensifying, with both financial and ethical stakes higher than she had ever imagined.